Welcome to another episode of the Intuitive Insights podcast. Today I'm absolutely over the moon to welcome Sophie Chapman. Sophie Chapman, Business Lead and Director at Heathrow Express. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Intuitive Insights podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Nina.
It is lovely to see you. I was thinking earlier about how long it's been since we first met and we had a posh cup of tea in the Handsome Lounge at St Pancras Hotel. And it just feels so long ago. I'm sure you were working at Eurostar at the time, so I don't want to preempt the conversation, because in true Intuitive Insights style, where I'd like to start the conversation is right back at the beginning of your career, please, in terms of I'd like you to talk us through where you've been and what you've done, and also your motivation for joining the transport industry in the first place. Where did that come from? Because that always fascinates me to find out why people did. And, you know, there are some who said, oh, I thought I'd give it a go for 6 months and I'm still here 35 years later. And then, you know, other people, Mr. Hotwood, for example, Mark Hotwood, who knew from the age of 4 that that's what he wanted to do. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to you, and I'd love you to talk us through your career to date, please, Sophie Chapman.
Okay, thank you. So I studied at university, at Newcastle University, ironically, Government and European Community Studies, and the purpose of that degree was to sort of get the sort of Europeans of the future ready to go and be involved in Brussels and so on. So that's a bit sad now, really, that Brexit has happened, and that was kind of not what was required in the end, I suppose. But when I left university, I didn't really know what to do, and I wasn't really sure what path to take, and I just ended up working at Waterstones, and earning not very much money, and sort of still living at home and so on. And then I saw 2 adverts, in fact, one for Eurostar itself and one for Four Seas, which is cross-channel catering company, which was the company that ran the Eurostar catering operations. And so I applied for both, and I had a telephone interview for Four Seas in French, and I didn't get the job, because the French interview didn't go very well. But I did get the Eurostar job, and I mean, it's almost a bit mad now, but we started on 15,000 a year in 1995 in a, you know, customer facing job, and that amount of money then was, you know, life changing. It meant I could move out of home.
Yeah, it's huge. And, think about what I was earning.
Huge. and we were pre privatization, so we got safeguarded travel and free travel to work and all the rest of it, so it was like amazing.
Wow, yeah, great benefits.
And it was brilliant. So it was not long after Eurostar started. It was about must have been about 9 months after when I joined, so it was right at the start. There was loads of us joining at the same time, all about the same age, and we just had an absolute blast. It was brilliant fun. And it was, you know, you do get, I'm not sure I would have chosen that beforehand, the transport industry, but you do get it in your blood, just the sort of, it's almost the romance of it and the iconicness of it, and the all the different people and all the different ways you can make their day better. So I was a sort of customer facing, selling tickets, all of those sorts of things.
So on the station or actually on the train, Sophie?
In Waterloo International.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Exciting.
And it was brilliant. And then I sort of kind of, I guess in my mind, I feel like I got my act together after a couple of years of really just enjoying life. And, you know, we used to do night shifts and then go off to, on the last night shift, go off to Smithfield Market and have pints in the morning and stuff.
Oh, good for you.
Just like lots of fun.
Brilliant.
And then, sort of had a little process of getting my act together. So then I started sort of working my way up the ladder at Eurostar. So I worked in the control room for a while, did a duty manager job at Waterloo International, ops manager, which was kind of deputy to the terminal manager, and then I was terminal manager, and all through those years, Eurostar had some very challenging situations and performance and disruption, and you know, some prolonged over days, and it was a real looking back on it, it was a really good lesson in resilience and knowing you could get through things, because sometimes you would have disruption, you just didn't know when it would end, and it was really, sometimes it was very, very, very tough. And I can remember times when I'd sort of, the only thing I could do to sort of get myself through it was just remember that time is going to pass, and this will end at some point, and in the meantime all we can do is our best, sort of thing. So yeah, that then I was terminal manager for only a brief period of time, but then I went off on maternity leave and had my daughter, and when I came back we were in the middle of the transfer from Waterloo to St Pancras. So I took a role which was kind of like being the terminal manager at St Pancras before we'd started there. So really managing the sort of people change, managing people's expectations, getting them ready for the move. And yeah, you know, that was a brilliant thing to be part of. And one of my favourite things in my career, you know, you get to attend events and things, and one of the best times I think sort of a big event I ever had was it was called Purple Haze, the opening of St Pancras, when all the trains came in through this big cloud of purple smoke.
Oh my goodness.
And so we had the kind of staff colleague one the night before, and then there was the royal opening the next day. So one of them I attended in the audience, and that was the best bit really, and the second one I was sort of in the lineup to say hello to the Queen, but we kind of didn't really see all the other stuff happening, although it was, you know, it was great, brilliant to be part of it. But
I'm sure
but that was actually, after that was really quite challenging, because whilst the station had opened, particularly kind of back of house and staff facilities, a lot of that hadn't really been properly finished, and it was quite a difficult start, kind of behind the scenes.
That's really interesting, because I kind of when you're saying about you know, your role was to get St Pancras, get the team ready for that transition from Waterloo to St Pancras, and my first thought goes to St Pancras station is one of my all-time favourite stations. I absolutely love the drama of it, the cathedralness of it, the, you know, the elegance as well. I just think there is a really beautiful elegance, and the pace is slower there. There's not as many people, certainly from my perspective, dashing around. It's all very kind of like, you know, we're all here to do something nice. So that transition for the team to come from Waterloo to St Pancras, was it exciting? Or was there some resistance? Was it more kind of, we can't wait to get there? Or were there some people resisting the change?
I think overall there was generally excitement, and that's what we'd worked on as a whole business, to really generate that excitement. But you had to be kind of realistic at the same time. And so part of what I was doing was sort of managing expectations that it is brilliant, it's fabulous, it's going to be great, it's a beautiful thing like you've just described. But we are going to have to accept that there's a few things that we're going to need to sort out when we get there, rather than that are going to be ready before. So and there was a lot of kind of with various stakeholders trying to get things straight and get things sorted, and just all of us learning how to operate the station, because it had been designed for certain ways of doing things in mind, but then it turned out perhaps in some ways those didn't work. So for example, travelators are a bit too steep really for people with luggage and things like that. So really practical things that just had to all kind of work through together to get to a place where it was operating smoothly. So after that I took on a role which was head of stakeholder management, I think that's what it was, and that covered sort of rail stakeholders like HS1, Network Rail, etc. in the UK, plus the Home Office, the Border Force, and then the police and security forces in the other countries as well.
Right.
And well, there was and involved Deutsche Bahn as well, because they were so at that point sort of thinking about coming into London, and so part of my role was kind of discussing with them how I was going to be able to, how Eurostar and Deutsche Bahn were going to be able to work together in the same
Okay.
station. That was very interesting. And yeah, again, I had so many experiences through working at Eurostar that I would never have had. One of those was going to the opening of a depot in Frankfurt with Deutsche Bahn, and their approach to that was there was like chefs cooking things in the middle of the depot. There was loads of wine and everything, which
really,
you just think,
okay.
God, really. And then they drove the opening ceremony. They'd got all these polystyrene bricks across the door of the depot, like the train.
Right. Yeah.
Door, and they drove a train through them. It
oh
was
my goodness.
totally bizarre.
So complete contrast to the purple haze at St Pancras, I would imagine. It's kind of coming back to my kind of elegance thing, I guess, in terms of that station.
Yes. And then the other part of that role was really complicated, like dealing with all of those different stakeholders. And the biggest challenge at that time, which people may have heard about, was the Leo Loophole.
Right.
Where, because customers could go from Brussels to Lille, which was within Schengen, so they didn't expect to have to show their passports, and there was quite a serious sort of quite an important lobby that didn't believe they should need to show their passport. That turned into the loophole that then people traffickers were using to bring people into the UK, because you could sort of avoid
blimey, right,
you could avoid the UK border force. Anyway, that all landed as a big problem via, I think, the Daily Mail or something, and it was just, it suddenly became a massive problem that kind of we had to work with all these stakeholders with all these different interests and requirements, and then legal rights and principles and stuff to try and get to a solution. And eventually the solution was, after many months of trying to work this out, was to build a separate Schengen terminal at Brussels Midi, so that the Brussels-Lille commuters could go in a different route, totally avoid border force, and then be confined to one coach on the train, so that you could check that everyone who'd got on by that route then had got off at Lille and couldn't be overcarried into London.
See, Sophie, this is a classic example of, do you know, when, if I speak to my daughter's peer group, so Neve's 19 now, but over the last few years, when we've been talking with her friends about career choices or even kind of A-level choices, degree choices, if I ever say something about, what about the rail industry? And then people will say, oh, well, it's all about trains and it's all about driving trains. And it's like, no, what you've got involved in is like so far removed from obviously the people trafficking could potentially take place on a train. So there's the link. But for you to be involved in that, I'm assuming, even though your degree was in government and European studies, then you still would have had to learn on the job for this one.
Yeah, and the really interesting learning about that is how all those different organisations do business. And you can't approach, even the French police and the Belgian police do things differently in terms of decision making, how you engage with them. And so French police, when everything had sort of been decided, this is how we're going to do, a lot of that conversation had happened. So, kind of most broadly what was going to happen had been agreed. But we had to go and do this kind of almost like a set piece ceremonial moment, and all these men in their police uniforms with all their epaulets and stripes and hats and all the rest of it in a police station in Lille. And then me and one or two other people from Eurostar had to go and play out in French this is how we're proposing to solve this problem. Is everybody agreed?
Wow.
And it was almost the formal endorsement of a decision rather than a meeting where you decide something.
Okay.
Whereas with other stakeholders, you go to the meeting and it's open and you decide something and you agree it, but it's just different styles and approaches.
Yeah. A real lesson in international business, but in real life doing it. You're not reading about it or, watching a YouTube video about it. You're actually in it and playing a central role as well. How exciting.
Yeah, so that was, it was exciting. And then after that role, I sort of got a secondment to the Eurostar Keolis bid team as deputy bid director for our East Coast bid, which anyone who's done bidding will know it's a real experience, and you have to throw yourself into it, and it is sort of takes over your life for a period. But again, it was great experience, and my job was to make sure that the Eurostar team that were involved in it were being looked after and taken care of, and also to make sure that it was all Eurostar-y enough and represented what Eurostar brand was all about. And then when I came back from that, I had what was certainly the best job I had at Eurostar, which was head of onboard services. So that's managing the trade managers in all the countries, the catering offer, the catering contract, the catering logistics, which is actually really, really complicated, and the business lounges, and the best bit of all, which was the relationship with Raymond Blanc.
I did not think you were going to say that then. I didn't know what was coming, but it wasn't that.
And it was just, I think that out of any job, that job was the one where I could see that we would do things and they would make an impact on the customer.
Yeah.
And it's that's really motivating. And it was really exciting to kind of go, right. And you had quite a lot of freedom to sort of say, here's what we're going to do now. We're going to do this. We're going to simplify that. We're going to change this. And so, working with Raymond was again another sort of experience that I would never have had.
Yeah.
And I've got a memory of we used to go and visit the catering suppliers. There was one in each country, and each round of menu development, he would go to at least one of the tastings.
Okay.
And one day we went together to Burgundy. We went by train to Burgundy,
right?
And we were staying in this little B&B, and the memory is of being in the back of a taxi with Raymond Blanc,
right,
going through the French countryside, and he was sort of sitting there chatting away about the Charolais cows and blah blah blah, and I just had a sort of, I can't believe I'm here.
Yeah, that's a pinch me moment, isn't it?
I can't believe this moment is happening to me.
The glamour of it all, Sophie.
It was very exciting. Yeah, we did loads of things together. We developed a bespoke gin for Eurostar called Toujours 21, and we agreed on the name together.
That happened. A bespoke gin, my word. Ahead of the time there as well, though, because obviously gin's a big thing now, isn't it? But kind of relatively recently, so I think last 7 or 8 years. But
so you might have heard of Silent Pool, who are now a big brand, but they're near where I live, and I sort of said to them, "Do you want to make a bespoke gin? We might be able to get Raymond Blanc involved." So of course they were delighted. So we took Raymond down to the distillery, and he chose all the flavors and so on, and we chose the name together. It's all very exciting.
So, and again, another kind of, who knew you did that in the rail industry? Who knew that kind of stuff went on, when people are talking about careers that they want to do? And presumably that conversation in the back of the taxi was all in French, so you're using your languages as well.
A bit of franglais, Raymond. And actually, that job isn't remotely all glamour. Wasn't all glamour. There was a lot of walking around the catering logistics units and trying to figure out how to do things more efficiently, and train managers in all the countries, but but it was just all of it was great fun.
Yeah,
not all of it
I
was
would
glamorous.
imagine. No, a lot of hard work, and as you say, a lot of traipsing around, a lot of detail stuff, a lot of kind of working out logistically how things were going to work. But really nice that there's a sprinkling of fairy dust in there as well, with a famous chef.
Made it a great job.
Yeah, I bet it did.
So then I had the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy from Eurostar, and I'd been there 21 years, and I thought, I love it, but if I don't go now and take this opportunity, I'm never going to know what else I could have done.
Yeah.
And so I decided to do it. And I had 3 months off, which is, having worked, continuously, other than maternity leave, it's really quite odd not to have a responsibility for anything other than your home and your daughter and your family and all that sort of thing. But so that was good, though, a great opportunity. And I would, if people get the opportunity to do that, I think it really does sort of clear the head and make you ready to go again, sort of thing.
Absolutely. It's that time for reflection, isn't it? Which I don't think that as a matter of course we don't allow ourselves almost that time to stop and reflect and then go again. So to have the opportunity to do that is a great one. I think it's somebody said to me, oh, you can have 3 months off with no responsibilities, just not to, you don't need to do anything. I think my initial thought would be, yes, when does it start? Can I go now? But I know myself well enough to know that I would reckon I'd get 3 or 4 weeks in at best. And then I'd be like, right, oh, I had an idea about something. And I thought, oh, could we do this? And I'd be itching to get back to it. So I think it's kind of a balance, isn't it, of saying, give yourself enough time to step back from the busyness and to think, but not too much time that you kind of get out the swing of things.
And that, the other thing about that, the only other thing about that is at that point, I didn't have a job to go to. So there is always that.
There's unknown as well.
There's also that kind of in the back of the mind about how long do you just sit here enjoying having the time off before you start thinking, actually going to need to make, earn some money at some point.
Yeah.
So anyway, I got an opportunity to join a bid team, which was the Govia bid team for Southeastern, and so I set myself up as a consultant and went off and did that for a little while. And I must say, bidding's not my favourite thing to do.
Right.
It's so sort of theoretical, and you don't, unless you win, you don't really get the chance to see any of it happening.
That's it. The fruits of your labour. You can come up with all these great ideas, and as you say, it is all great in theory and a huge amount of hard work. And then if you win, then fantastic, euphoria. But then obviously the reality of, well, you need to deliver that now. Everything you've talked about and come up with, you need to deliver. I've never worked in a bid team. We've worked with a lot of clients on their bid team. And I think that feeling of you haven't won just must be heartbreaking, because I think people literally do put their heart and soul into that process for that period of time. And then to be told that, well, all that hard work has kind of come to nothing because you haven't won it, must be just absolutely soul destroying. So you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you go on and do the next one. If that's, I know lots of people who
they
do that.
They just do it.
I couldn't do it, Sophie.
No,
it wouldn't do for me. I'd be broken by it, I think.
I've done 2, and I wouldn't choose to do that.
No.
I don't think as a career, certainly I might, if there was a really good reason to do it, I'd do it, but I don't think I'd do it as a one of these people that kind of has made a career doing it.
Which work stream were you on the Southeastern?
I was customer experience lead.
That's the only role I could do as well. Do you know, if I kind of look at it, I think, gosh, there's some really clever folk doing lots of clever things. And for me, the most exciting bit is always the customer, and that kind of feeling that, well, here's an opportunity to really kind of think outside the box to say, right, well, what could we deliver? And obviously the experience that you had at Eurostar, and having that freedom, the autonomy to develop things and try new things for the customer purely with the customer in mind, would stand you in really good stead to have some, again, really valuable input to that bid.
Yeah, and the thing is that in the way that they work kind of constrains the way that bids work, kind of constrains in a way that freedom, because there's so many things that you have to deliver this part, you have to deliver this part, and it kind of boxes you in a little bit. And anyway, that one didn't even come to a conclusion. It just drifted along, and then they just kind of said, we're not doing that anymore. And nobody ever knew, I don't think, who might have won it. So, so then, I had my sort of business going as a consultant, and I went to work at Heathrow Express as a consultant to help with the business change that kicked off in 2018, which was transferring all the operations over to Great Western, and then eventually to roll out the new refurbished trains that would be operated by Great Western. So that happened in phases over 2018, 2019, and I was kind of leading on the sort of operations side of delivering that change. And then COVID came along, and we luckily, as Heathrow Express, we were able to furlough people. We went down to 2 trains per hour. We had no passengers. There was a couple of times I went to the airport, and it brought it home to you much more than sitting at home in your little bubble. Just walking through Terminal 5, and there was nobody there, and the airport was open.
Really quite eerie, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was. It was a bit apocalyptic.
Like a Will Smith film, without the benefit of having Will Smith.
And so we were already restructuring the business because of the whole transfer to Great Western. And then Heathrow restructured, and Heathrow Express restructured. And towards the end of that, so September 2020, as part of the restructure, the business lead decided to take voluntary severance.
Right.
So I interviewed for his job, and was successful, and then immediately started to think, oh my God, what have I done? we were in the middle of kind of 2 related but separate restructures, no passengers, and then there was this whole pressure about the trains needing to be in service. The deadline was February 2021. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got out of our depot at Old Oak Common, which would have knocked on to HS2. So it felt like the stakes were quite high.
Absolutely. Bit of a sense of urgency there.
And of course, COVID had knocked onto the rollout of the refurb of the trains and so on. So it was my partner in crime, Barry Milsom at Great Western. We considered it quite a character building part of our careers, getting through that. So then 2021 has been really about dealing with thinking things are coming back, then they're not coming back, looking after our colleagues, bringing them back from furlough, getting the trains into service, managing ETCS, which is a whole podcast in itself about the lessons learned from that experience and the complexity of it. It's only now, only in the last 3 months that it's felt like things are recovering.
Right.
And because it's been sort of stop-start, and in January we still had the work from home instructions that really impacted on both the airport, but particularly Heathrow Express. But now the airport recovery has been faster than probably anybody expected, and it's brilliant because it's given everyone a lease of life. Everyone can do what they're here to do. Customers are really up for a holiday and getting back to travel. So it's a great opportunity for us to give give customers, you know, what they need, and what they need is actually looking after more than they normally would, because everyone's forgotten everything about how they used to travel internationally. So one of the things we do, everyone at Heathrow does, is here to help put the purple polo shirt on and go and tell people what to do with the plastic bags at security, or manage the trays and things like that.
Right. So we're going back to basics then, aren't we? In terms of this is how we travel. Yeah.
And they rock up, and I would say 50% of people that I encountered when I've been doing that job is a sort of either can't remember, know there's something about the bottles and the bags and the liquids, but can't quite remember what.
Yeah.
Or just look at you and say, what's this for?
I find that really interesting. I flew out of Liverpool a couple of weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I thankfully didn't fly from Manchester, because that just sounds like it's like just very challenging for the people who are working at Manchester Airport. But I was absolutely amazed, Sophie, at how many people, if you'd have just told me that story and I hadn't been through an airport recently, I'd have been like, what kind of people have forgotten that you need to put and if you can't take anything over 100 mil and you've got to pull it all in a plastic bag. But there were loads of people who had forgotten about what you do, exactly what you've just said. And it's weird. And I think the other thing that kind of we picked up on was there's also a sense of nervousness.
Really, very much so. Yeah.
Because we haven't done it for a while. It's kind of getting back into that swing again. So that was also really, from a human behaviour perspective, I found that really fascinating.
We've seen, higher level of verbal assaults and that sort of thing. And I think it's partly driven by that anxiety, and that it's not just because we haven't travelled for a long time. It's also because of the other, you almost not sure you're going to get to where you're going until you're safely through the border at the destination, because of all the checks and paperwork and things, and that's easing off now. But I think for that first few months, everyone's anxiety levels were much higher. So we certainly worked with our colleagues to sort of say, we need to recognise that people are in a stressful situation, and they need to be kind of looked after and helped.
And that's it. It's in a completely different way. It's really interesting. And I think, so what occurs to me, Sophie, as you've kind of taken me through your career story up to this point, is that you've found yourself at various stages in change and transformation, leading it, helping other people to navigate it, been through privatisation, you've been through that kind of moving from Waterloo to St Pancras, and all of these different elements of change. I think it's fair to say, and I'm still a new girl, I've only been in this industry for 10 years, so I'm still very much kind of in my very steep learning curve. But is it fair to say that the change and transformation that we are currently at the very start of is the biggest thing that has happened in terms of change in the industry?
I think it could be.
Okay. Right. We have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I guess a couple of my 3 wishes that relate to this.
Okay, so we'll move into that, and that's kind of where the conversation is going. The experience that you have, the knowledge that you've gained through the various roles that you've done, when you look at where we are now as an industry, and obviously, we're recording this on the last day of May. We've got all sorts of things hanging in the balance in terms of what's going to happen next. I'm going to grant you 3 wishes. I'll get my magic wand out of my bag and wave it and say to you, Sophie, what if you could have those 3 wishes for the future of the rail industry, what would it be?
So the first one would be to have some more women in senior roles, and in general more diverse people in senior roles.
Yeah.
I'm not always, but I would say very often the only woman in a meeting that I attend, and that's always often been the case. But I think now that I'm in this role where I probably speak more frequently to the traditional rail industry than I did before, it's more noticeable. So I think, you know, we all bring something different, don't we? And if everyone's the same, then possibly we won't get to the right decisions and so on.
I think that's, and I completely agree, as you would expect me to. And I think that there is a general understanding in the transport industry, not just rail, but across the piece, or certainly rail and bus. Maybe aviation's a bit better balanced, but we know we need a more diverse workforce. We know we need to see that diversity, particularly at leadership level. And there's lots and lots of reports out there. You know, McKinsey would be the most easiest one to recall. But why is it important now? Why do we need it now more than ever, in your view?
I think because it represents the change that we're trying to achieve, which is modernisation of the industry, and how can it be, you know, outwardly seen as modernised or feel modernised to work in if it's the same sort of profile of person that is in all the, or a majority of the leadership roles? And perhaps we need some fresh perspectives to make this change work. Yeah,
you'll not hear any argument from me on that one, Sophie.
So my second one is, and I don't think this is likely to happen unless you're very, very good with your magic one.
I've supercharged it.
Is to get the reform done quickly, because I think the longer everything takes to do, the further away we get from what the original idea of it was. And you'd start to potentially lose the vision that we were trying to achieve in the first place, which is simplification, modernisation, you know, working in the interests of the customer. And I feel like it's already getting too complicated. There's a lot of people working on it already. And we interact with quite a few of those in different reasons. And also linked to that is kind of change management, you know, that huge workforce, most of which work for Network Rail or the DfT managed TOCs, are all going to be affected. And so I think ideally it would be done quickly and with really, really good change management in place to take those people with the change. But I'm not sure we're there right now.
I think it's funny, isn't it? There are different words that when I'm in conversation day in, day out, there are trends in terms of words that people use. You know, and there was lots of those, obviously, during the early days of the pandemic. Everything was unprecedented. And then we were all pivoting, and there's all these kind of words. And I think the one at the moment over the last, I would say over the last 6 to 8 weeks, is glacial. And it, you know, I was reading my rail magazine yesterday when it arrived on the doorstep, and it's in there. The word is in there, and it's kind of, this is, a lot of people are using this word in relation to the pace of change. I think the challenge is that the change that needs to happen is so enormous, even if we just consider the number of people that are involved, that it is the proverbial turning a tanker, isn't it? You know, it's kind of, how the heck do you do that and get some momentum? But I agree with you. I think that the slower it is, the longer it takes, and the higher the risk that we lose sight of why we're doing it in the first place. But of course, and you've got constant change happening whilst you kind of like, well, we set our stall out. This is what we're doing. We had the William Shapps plan for rail just over a year ago, and that set out the direction. But so much has happened since then. So there's these constant change within the change, isn't there?
Yeah, and then my third one relates to this as well, but this is more about customers. And I think there's a risk that under this big umbrella of GBR, we end up with a sort of so simple, lowest sort of common denominator of service that fits everything across the country. You know, that's delivered through kind of standards and metrics and whatever. And what would be a real shame that the talks, some of the talks do really well, some less well, I guess, is catering for their own audience or their own part of the country, or the type of customer that travels on their train, or the different types at different times of the week or whatever. And everyone's having to change now because the demographics have changed. And I think the risk is there's two. There's one which is we get a kind of one size fits all. This is how the service is on GBR railways. And the other is, and particularly going back to open access operators, because obviously I've only really worked for Eurostar and Heathrow Express, is that's where you see that individuality coming through. So if you think about all of them, including, you know, Lumo, Hull Trains, Grand Central, us, Eurostar, they all do something different and they do it well, but it's not, doesn't tend to be quite the same with the DFT managed talks. Because there's much more specification, and it's not about the people that run the services, I don't think, because there's lots of people, good ideas. But if you stifle all that because you've got one size fits all, you're not going to be providing something fantastic for customers. And so I guess there's protecting open access operators, because they do offer more different. And the other thing that we can do, that I don't see that in the future GBR will be able to do, but might need to think about how it does do it, is being agile and doing things quickly and responding to change. And you know, a little example is we started getting complaints when we brought the new trains in, and as customers started to come back after the pandemic, about noise on the trains. And you might remember that Heathrow Express used to have BBC News with the volume on.
Yes.
That was a real USP and everyone loved it, blah, blah. Now they don't. They want, because everything's changed, it feels like customers want peace.
Right.
So we've done, you know, we could just say, right, what we're going to do is we're going to turn off BBC. We're just going to have subtitles only. We're going to replace it. We're in the process of doing that with onboard media, with a QR code and all the rest of it. We're going to minimize the announcements, you know, and we're going to try and create an environment that's as quiet as possible. But we could just decide to make
that decision, can't you?
And and then, you know, Grant Shapps about 6 months later said he's going to do a report into whether customers like announcements. And it's like, if it's going to be that long for you to decide what to do about a customer changing requirements, then it's not going to be quick enough. And actually, everyone's demonstrated they can move quickly because they had to in the pandemic.
Absolutely. The industry responds amazingly well, doesn't it, to a crisis? And decisions were taken so quickly, things happened so swiftly. I think the examples of collaboration were just amazing, where everybody just worked together, irrespective of owning group, whether you were a DFT talk, whether you were an open access talk, and this kind of, you know, knowledge sharing and sharing the pain, actually, to some degree, of kind of, well, we're all in this together. And I guess there's a message there for colleagues at the department in terms of whatever the passenger service contracts come to look like, because there's a definite benefit to one size fits all from an efficiency perspective, and therefore from a cost perspective. And obviously, you know, quite keen on focusing on that from the in terms of the whole of £2 billion that we're looking to fill. But if you are contracted and working to that contract within an inch of it, the ability to respond to customers quickly and therefore impress them and delight them is stifled because, well, we've got to go and get a change report on that and see if we can go outside of the contract. And I don't think customers would respond necessarily very positively to, we need to wait 6 weeks for somebody to sign that off.
But what you could do is come up with a method where a change under the value of X only needs one stamp on the, only needs one person at the GBR to be consulted. So it could be done in a week or whatever.
Yes.
You could put mechanisms.
There's ways around it, isn't there? Yeah.
I don't know that's been done, but I think it's a risk of with such a big organisation that you end up with all this governance that stops people just doing things that they know are right.
Yes, yeah. And my concern there would be around the people who have had that autonomy previously in their roles, in their senior roles in the industry, will start to get a bit naffed off with the whole kind of, oh no, you're not allowed to do that and you're not allowed to do this. And then we start leaking talent, which I think we've kind of seen in a much smaller way than I was anticipating, if I'm honest. But I wouldn't. It's something we need to keep an eye on as an industry. There's so much to do, Sophie. There are 3 wishes there, all of which I can completely and utterly relate to. Thank you for sharing them with us, and I think for kind of just starting a thought process off, and be really interesting to see when people listen to our podcast conversation what their thoughts and comments are as well. I could talk to you for ages. I love our conversations. You always provoke a different way of thinking for me. But I have to bring the conversation to a close. And in traditional Intuitive Insights style, I'm going to ask you to share a quote with us, please. Something that has meaning for you, that has, you've kind of returned to perhaps throughout your career, or actually something that just means something to you now.
So my quote, it's not so much a quote, but it is a thing that is said continuously every day.
Okay.
Which is put your own oxygen mask on before assisting others. And I believe that leadership is all about helping other people to flourish and looking after other people and taking care of them, nurturing them and enabling us all to succeed by doing that. And again, probably another conversation, but I've had times when I've not looked after myself and I've become less effective and less able to do that, and learned my lesson. And I feel that kind of, it's a bit of a trope, I suppose, but it encapsulates for me that if you don't do that, then you can't help other people. And it's so important, because we get swept up in all the things that we've got to do, and sometimes you need to make sure you've got things in place that keep you going.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. It's so, when you hear that message when you're on the plane, it goes against everything, doesn't it? Especially if you're traveling with young children. I'd remember hearing it and thinking, well, I couldn't possibly put mine on first. I'd be wanting to sort the kids out, But it's so true. If you can't breathe, you can't help anybody else. So I think it's massive, and I'm really grateful to you for putting it on this podcast, because we haven't had it before. It is something that I come back to time and time again. And it's absolutely critical. But I think also, Sophie, what that does for me is emphasize again one of the things that I really enjoy about what you bring to this party in terms of your leadership style. You and I have talked about this before in terms of your leadership style. You're very nurturing, but I also consistently find you very open and very honest about where you are. And I think in terms of people who work within your team, then that's a trait that is very much appreciated, because you are able to connect with people. And I think that's something which is really important as a leader. I think it's always been important, but as we move forward into whatever we're facing, I think will become even more critical, quite honestly. Thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out of what I know is a really busy diary to join me on the virtual couch for this podcast series. And I shall look forward to seeing you again very soon. But for now, Sophie Chapman, Business Lead and Director for Heathrow Express, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's been good fun. Thanks very much, Nina.
My huge thanks to Sophie Chapman, Lead Director for Heathrow Express, for sharing her career story to date and some of her own intuitive insights in terms of the UK transport sector.